Hi, folks. Although we're supposed to start about now, we're still missing some of our presenters, so we're going to give it another couple of minutes. But we'll start very soon.
Colin, I see you're in the queue.
I'm just seeing if this is working. I'm all good. I'll get out of the queue.
Okay. And yet you started a rush. Here comes Spencer.
To let the chairs know, I uploaded slides for the last slot about 30 minutes ago.
I think Ted approved him.
Oh, and thank you so much. And if it is okay, that might go better because we're kind of walking through GitHub issues. It might go better if I can just share my screen so that I can click all the links and get to the right places quickly. If that's okay with y'all. But you got some time to think about it before you decide. Thank you.
I think it should be fine.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Ted, you want to kick things off and see if we can get a note takers? We're up to 21 people, which is maybe fewer than I'd hoped, but.
Okay. So welcome everybody to the interim working group meeting for the MOQ working group. This session is being recorded. It's will eventually turn up on YouTube, but it's being recorded by the MediaCo system even as we speak. Here is the note well. If you are not familiar with the IETF, the note well gives you the pointers you need to understand the consequences of participation, both for your IPR responsibilities, primarily about disclosure, and the personal code of conduct that we kind of expect how people should behave. So if you're not familiar with these, please take a look at them. And that is, hopefully most people here are already familiar with them. This is the agenda. We are in the administrivia portion of it, and the next bits are going to go through the new candidates for working group drafts. The transport overview presentation will be Cullen. Then Victor will do a deep dive on the namespaces, names, and uniqueness. Will talk about a draft that shows you how to use media over this set of transports, and then Luke will go through example flows, what ingest looks like, distribution like conferencing. Then there's a big whack of time for discussion, about almost an hour. Then your chairs will return with a discussion of adoption, and then James and Spencer will go through the requirements draft. The final bit is next steps, where we start talking about planning for IETF 117, in particular questions about whether people need agenda time, whether there are specific side meetings people want to start talking about, or if anybody has hackathon plans. Ellen, did I miss anything off the agenda?
I think that's everything on the agenda. I guess we should offer a chance for folks to bash it.
Yep, I was giving you the first chance, but then now, General, is there?
Since I wrote it, I don't think I need to bash
it. Any concerns or questions about this agenda? Hearing none, the next bit of administrivia is I still have not seen anybody volunteer to be a note taker. So if there's anybody who's here who can just record what our decisions are, that would be very handy. Again, we do have the recordings. We don't need, Martin said this, Luke replied that, Mo responded with something else. This is just high level. The group met, discussed this level notes. If anybody can take that, we'd appreciate it. If not, it will be a long silence. Spencer, you have your mic unmuted. Was that hopefully because you were going to volunteer or no?
Sort of. I am in the hedge doc, and I at least copied the agenda into it. But I will not be doing well if I am the only note taker. So I would suggest that at least a couple of people join in there with me, so that I don't zone out. And if the chairs could say, and so what the notes need to say is, that will be very helpful for me.
Okay.
Like I said, I would love to not do this alone.
So we would love for you not to do it alone. Is there somebody who can volunteer to help Spencer out, and the chairs will do their best to say, for the note takers, this is the decision to record.
That would be fabulous.
Jonathan, can I pick on you?
Hung-Chi also volunteered in the chat.
Thank you.
Oh, I didn't see Hung-Chi. Thank you very much. And Jonathan, if you could help out.
Thank you both, and please put your name at the top of the hedge doc so that you get appropriate credit.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
and if you're coming to San Francisco, I'll find you with chocolate.
All right. I always like bribery in the form of chocolate, he said, clarifying for the record. To the note takers, the chairs are in favor of chocolate is what you should write down. And with that first comment to the note takers, I think we're now out of administrivia and over to transport overview, and that's Colin.
Ask one of you to share slides if that's okay.
Also, Spencer, your mic is still on.
And it may be like that the whole day. That's kind of like I'm saying I appreciate help on taking notes.
So I'm going to be talking about just sort of the high-level picture of the mock transport, which is sort of a key draft that sort of ties things together here. And it's a little bit weird for me to be talking about this. I'm not one of the authors of it. This represents, I have helped do some of the work on it, but this really comes out of a combination of a bunch of things, but mostly out of Luke's warp draft, and that splits some stuff apart. So over the past, since the last IETF meeting, there's been a ton of energy by a bunch of people to try and split these apart, get some modular models, really get this narrowed down to the part that everybody agrees on, and get this to a state that we think is adoptable. So I'm going to be explaining this, and then at the very end, talking a little bit more about why I think this is in pretty good shape to be adopted by the working group. So next slide, please. There, it came up. So just going to hit on reminding people that we had a lot of different goals for all of this work, and combining together lower latency, better scalability, unified protocol for ingest and distribution. And these aren't all the goals for the working group, but these are the goals that really hit this particular piece in the layer, and where I'm going to talk about it. And a lot of these things are why we ended up with some of these things designed the way they are in this draft, is to sort of simultaneously meet the needs of all the different sort of groups that are coming together to try and bring these things in the same time. So with that, jumping on to the next slide here. Now, big picture, you're going to see various versions of this slide today through, from Luke, from Will, from other people, mostly better than my version of it. But I want to just sort of put where the mock transport fits in this space. Okay. So we've taken some of the original drafts that covered a whole solution of how to deal with all of, defining what the media is and how the media gets organized, and how you say what media you want to do and move it around. We split that up. So what the mock transport draft does at this point is it allows you to sort of say, I'm going to talk about what a track is later, but I want to receive this track, or I want to send this track, or I have this many tracks. It doesn't talk about what's in the tracks, what the tracks mean, all of those things. That happens at the streaming formats layer, where you might be using CMAF related stuff and some various things or other ways of doing it to say the details of this. But this is about how you move the bits of the track and say what you want. Now, it sits directly on top of Web Transport or Raw Quick. And that's the thing that's actually more like a transport. It's giving you the congestion control, the security, those things, even though we call this mock transport. And really none of those are transports. UDP is the transport it's all sitting on top of. But when we say mock transport here, we mean something that's sitting on top of the Web Transport and Quick, and it's exposing to the layers above it a way to sort of name and ask for media and get and receive media, both for all the variety of use cases. So next slide. I'm going to jump into a bit of terminology here. So I'm going to take this simple ingest case on the left-hand side. You got some device with a camera, and it's sending media off to somebody, off to some server in the cloud. Now, we use the words client and server a bunch. And client and server, we mean in very much the, quick meaning of these words. Okay, it's like the TLS and quick meaning of them. The client is the thing that initiates the connection to the server. Okay, that's all we mean by client and server. And for the ingest case, we've got that going up that way. The distribution case too, it's still the client that connects to some media provider server that's going to give us stuff. So the other terms we use are producer and consumer. So producers producing media, consumers consuming media. The media flows in that general direction, okay? And there's more complicated cases, but in the simplest cases, that's what we've got right here. So next slide. So to bring in a little bit more of a slightly more complicated case, we also have these things called relays. And you can think of this as a content distribution network. And it's, in this case, the producer is a client. It's connecting to a server, which is the relay. That relay may use the mock transport to connect to other relays, or it may use its own completely internal protocol that we know nothing about. That's not what we're specifying. We're specifying between the devices out on the edge, how they connect up to this set of relays. So the sort of producer to the relay. On the other side, there are some devices with screens that are also connecting to the same relay, other relays, whatever. Okay, so server, the server client, the client server terminology here is the same, and also the producer consumer is, right? The screens over here consuming media, the producer with the cameras producing the media. Next slide. Now, this doesn't stop, obviously, in like the video conferencing case. You're both a producer of media and a consumer of media, and that's fine. You're producing different tracks and you're consuming different tracks. It's all fine. And there could also be other elements in the system that were also producers and consumers, like I wrote a transcoder on this one. And it's not like the protocol describes a transcoder or anything. The protocol describes how a producer and consumer can send media to each other. So that the transcoder is getting media from a lot of the producers and then producing some own media of itself that other consumers do, that's all fine. That's an application that happens outside of this, and we support that type of use case fine, but we don't need to talk about it deeply other than the producers and consumers. So next slide. So I need to talk about the model of what we're moving around. And I want to not confuse this with it. The streaming media layer, later Will's going to be talking about, how there's arranging of catalog and CMAF and fragments and sort of direct media objects. At the transport layer, at this mock transport layer, we don't really know about those things. What we know about are tracks. Tracks would probably contain and carry in some form or another media. It could be video, it could be audio, it might be text media, it could be something totally not. I mean, like this protocol, you could probably, I don't know, maybe you could use it to distribute haptics information for something else, or text information. It's not. We're really talking about how to organize the data into a model and move it around. We don't care deeply what the data is at this level. Okay, so the tracks are organized into groups, and so a track contains a bunch of groups, and inside of each group is a bunch of objects, and the objects have the actual data. Now, how video gets mapped into these exactly and stuff, that's discussed at the higher level of the streaming, what the application Will is going to talk about. But we have a couple key points that this level of the protocol does need to know about. The groups form join points. So basically, when you want to start receiving a track, you can start getting the latest group and all the information in that group of it. So the groups are information that you might need earlier information in the group to be able to decode it. We try and make the groups be that each group is all the data, all the objects in a group are you can decode them and understand what they mean. You can feed them through a video codec and decode and get something out of them using only the information that's in that group. They don't depend on objects in different groups. Now, there's some caveats to that. We get scalable codecs. It may not be exactly true. You can talk about whether lip sync violates that, but for the most part, we sort of think of these things as being an independent coding of information. So, for example, we might have our HD video in one track, and so low definition video in another track, and a client side receiver bandwidth control might, based on its bandwidth, select which track it wants to receive. The important thing from the MOQ transport is you can ask for these tracks, you can get the information in them, and that the relays can help distribute it. And the consumers and producers know what data to send and how to send around. That's what this protocol is about. So next slide. So we do name these tracks, and the full track name has two parts of it. Okay, it has a track namespace, it's sort of consider that the high order bits, and then inside of that a track name. And these are just a bunch of binary bits as far as this protocol works. And maybe they're part fragments of a URL. Who knows? Maybe there's something else. Maybe they're whatever. It doesn't really matter from this protocol's point of view. All it ever does is match these bits. Okay, combine those two combined together. The term we use for those two combined together is the full track name. Now, the full track name in many cases would be long, and we don't want to send that in all of our objects or something. So we often have a short integer that, in the way the protocol sets up, you know what the value is for a given name. That is just a short alias for the full track name. So this is called the track ID, and it's just a short alias for the full track name. And we use that. It's only exists to just make some of the messages smaller, so you don't have to send the full track name all the time. Okay. We also have a group sequence. So this is an integer that identifies which group it is inside of the track. And then inside of that, we have, remember, we have the objects inside of a group. We have an object sequence, which is an integer that identifies which object it is inside of the group. And one thing that's important about that one is it starts at 0 in each group, right? So you can tell where the beginning of the group is just looking at these integers. So those are really sort of the important terminologies, names, and pieces of this. And from that, the protocol is pretty simple. So next slide. The objects that we're going to send all of this media around in, and what level that's known about here. When we send each one of the objects, and there's some messages that go back and forth to set up sending objects, say what you want. I'm going to get to those messages in a second, but I just want to talk about what's in an actual object that we're going to send over the wire. The relevant information that's really in it here is you got the track ID, so you basically can look that up to find, the full track name of it. You've got the group sequence that identifies which it is. You've got the object sequence. And then you have some extra metadata that might that the relays and the components along the path need to be able to see about this. So right now there's only one piece of that, which is what we call send order or priority. And I'll talk more about that later, but this is just some bits that help provide information to relays to sort of know, which packet to send next, what the priority is, however you want to think about it, but gives it extra meta information to know which packet to send first when they have multiple packets that all need to go somewhere. Then we have the payload. This would be where the actual media goes into it. It is opaque to the relays. The mock transport doesn't know anything about it, doesn't look in it. It's just like that's moving the bits that have meaning at a higher level. There's been discussion of other pieces of metadata that could be added in here, like time to live or things like that. But the only thing that's in draft right now is just this send order that gives the information. Okay, next slide. So here I'm going to get into the actual call flow. So first of all, I'm going to talk on the distribution side. So this is a client that is a consumer. It wants to receive some video, and it's going to go talk to some server to get that video. So first of all, it sets up a web transport or a quick connection, and that sets up like you would think it was. Oh, sorry. There is some information it needs to know ahead of time before we even, get to this out of band. That's like what its connection URL is that it's going to connect to, and a track name that it might be interested in or not. And that's sort of an application level thing, but it might have some information like that. So it sets up the web transport connection. Then it sends a setup message. And right now, this setup message just has version negotiation and role in it, where the role is basically whether it's going to send video, whether it's a consumer, a producer, or both. Okay. The server can respond to this. I don't have all the. I'm missing some of the OK messages in here, but it sends an OK message on this. The server then can announce, this is optional, it can announce track namespaces that it's willing to publish. That might be useful in some use cases, it might not be in other cases. The client at this point sends a subscribe with the full track name of what it wants to receive. And remember, it may have just gotten a track namespace from the server to understand what the server is even willing to send it, or it may not have, but that doesn't really matter too much. The key thing here is it does a subscribe and passes the full track name. The scribe, it can come back with an error, obviously, but if it doesn't come back with an error, there could be some authorization information. If the scribe comes back with an OK, it includes a track ID and expiry time for that subscription. Now, at that point, and that's how the the mapping forms here on between the full track name and the track ID. At that point, the server can just start sending it mini media objects. So those are going to start flowing across. Okay. And that is pretty much the whole protocol. Like that's it. It's a fairly, fairly simple sort of approach to this. And I like the way that this splits it between what happens at a higher level, where we're going to be dealing with the catalogs and understanding what tracks you want and what to get, and what happens here, which is just pretty straightforward. So let me go to the next slide. The contribution flow, so somebody with a camera that's trying to send some video up to a server, is nearly exactly the same, right? Web transport, setup, role negotiation there again. You have this optional announce. I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about why that's there. And then the server this time subscribes to a full track name, and the subscriber sends the track ID and starts sending it. And then the producer here can start sending these mini objects of data up to the server. So it's identical flow on both this ingest and distribution use cases. Next slide. So I want to back up just one slide for a second. When we're dealing with a case with relays, these flows don't send at all. I mean, right here I wrote on server, it's just a server from it. It doesn't know as a relay. It doesn't know whether it's like the only server in the world. That the client that connected to it doesn't even really care exactly what it's talking to, okay? Because the protocol is about the same for it either way. And that's one of the things that we've tried to keep it through this draft is that what changes because you're talking to a relay is extremely minimal in the draft. There's not much changes because it's basically the same text throughout for anybody who's, if you're sending media, you do this. It doesn't matter whether you're a relay or a producer or what you are, and likewise. Okay, so I missed that when I was talking about. Next slide. So one of the open issues, and I'm sure the working group will discuss this for a bunch, but one of the key things for this is sort of figure out what you send next. Okay. And there's a bunch of things that we agree on, which is effectively the code needs to be able to figure out which code, what you send next, given the congestion limits of the quick connection you're about to send it on. And you got a bunch of things queued up that need to go, and how you pick which one to send next. Okay. We know that we want more or less the same algorithm for relays and endpoints. We know that that algorithm needs to be based on, looking at the information that's available there, things like the group ID, the object ID, the send order or priority, the information that's available to the algorithms doing this. So there's two algorithms that are defined in the draft right now, and neither one of these are just like, these are potential options as starting points for the working group to choose one. This is not we think the working group should have both of these or anything like that. It's just like, there's not consensus on this. We don't know quite what to do. So we wrote down two things that start to give a flavor. And I'm sure that the working group will want to do something as a working group that's a little bit different than either of these, but at least get something concrete that can give you a feeling of the type of thing we mean here by this in a strong way. So the send order one is on the left here. The producer, look, it knows what tracks it's dealing with. It knows how they're important of them it is. It knows which ones are audio, video, how the relevant importance of them is. So it can include a send order integer. And the idea is that these integers would generally, sort of increment with each frame or section of audio type idea. And you could make them slightly more important for audio to give it an advantage over video, or give some video advantages over other types of videos. So within a track namespace, the largest send order is sent first. And this is just an integer space that the producer controls and puts in what numbers it wants to put in here to cause the right thing to happen from its point of view, given everybody else along the path is going to execute this rule of within a track namespace, the largest send order is first. And it's envisioned these numbers just keep growing, like they're variable ints, they get very large, they can just keep growing forever. For the length of the whole session, they can get larger and larger. So the one on the right that I want to talk about here a little bit is the priority order. This one's a little bit different. It still has an integer that we write into the packet that people look at to decide what to do. But each object is given a priority order, and these aren't envisioned as just they keep incrementing and getting larger over time. It's just like, okay, we'd probably be giving our audio like one priority level and other things, a different priority level. It might be that iframes got a different priority level than p-frames inside of a group, those types of ideas. So within a group, the lower priority number, so priority one's most important, lower priority are sent first. Within a group of priorities are equal, then the lower object sequence is sent first. So within a group, you're sending your first stuff sooner than your later stuff. And that between groups, later groups are normally sent ahead of other earlier groups. And, all of these have some problems. We're trying to generate some, or Suhas and I are trying to generate some data on, how these various algorithms perform. I'm sure we'll get more in it. But the thing that I think that the people that have been working on this draft really agree strongly on is we need something along these types of lines, and these are two sort of candidate type of algorithms with some tweaks. Any questions on this particular slide before I move on? I'm trying to watch the queue here, but it's okay. Okay, so let me jump to one last slide here. Next slide. So what I really want to sort of get at from the point of coming out of the meeting today is this draft we put, that's the flavor of it. That's the big picture of how it fits together. That's the picture of how other things split up on top of it. I'm definitely a fan of how this has come out this way. I strongly think this draft's ready for adoption. And obviously parts of it will change after it's adopted, but I think it's a good basis for understanding architecturally sort of how to pin this working group down and have something pinned to the ground. Some of the corners of the tent pinned to the ground in a way that we can really make some rapid progress in the working group. So if there's any questions or sort of meta concerns that people would like to raise that bring them, of concerns about adopting it now, I'd really like to try and address those right now as best I can, or have any of the co-authors or actual authors of this draft step in and speak on it. But if anybody has some of sort of that level of concerns or architectural issues, that it would be really good to talk about.
Spencer, you're in the queue.
Okay, and I can cut and paste what I'm saying into the notes just for the note takers. Cullen, thank you for this presentation. I support adoption of this draft, full stop. I have a couple of comments about how this draft fits into the charter deliverables for the working group. You're talking about both architecture, well, you're talking about architectural concepts, and you're using terminology, and we really need to at least nail down the basics on both of those real soon. So I have two questions for the group. We're talking about adopting this as the protocol deliverable, protocol specification for common media publication protocol over QUIC that's in our charter. Can we adopt the draft as it is today and possibly move that material into another draft later, perhaps the architecture specification for common media delivery protocol over QUIC? That's what I'd like. That's what I'd like to see happen, and basically for us to, we've talked about needing to focus on architecture and terminology, but now that we're adopting drafts that are assuming an architecture and using terminology, it would be great if the different drafts that we are adopting use something like the same architecture and use something like the same terms to describe it. So, like I said, that's for the working group and the chairs as much as it is for you, Cullen.
Yeah,
but
makes sense, Spencer. And look, I should flag too that the current draft that we just published 0.0 on this, right, has a note at the top of the terminology section that says there's no consensus on this yet. And
yes.
We need to use the same words and have this nailed down in a document. But
yes, and it would be spectacular if we could remove that note before we send this to the RC editor.
Yes.
So that was one thing. The other one was for the people who have drafts in this working group. Can we have some specification that doesn't include mock transport in the title? Because it's like, how many mock transport layers, how many transport layers are we talking about to transport media? And I mean, I don't want to bike shed on this. Certainly not, not in a meeting like this. But it would be great if we could look at the protocol stack that you presented and see if we can think of better ways to describe that would be clearer for someone who's not a member of the working group but might have to be implementing this later. And that is everything I was going to say, and I will put my stuff in the notes.
Thanks, Spencer. So for the general question of adoption, we do have that at the end of the meeting, and we probably want to talk about it in kind of a cluster way about adopting this. But I will point out that just as a general thing, how many documents you use to satisfy a chartered item is kind of up to the working group, so we don't have any issue there.
Right.
On your bike set question, I love mauve, very lovely color. One of the original car toil coal tar pigments, very nice. But we probably should put that off into a bit later yet.
Yes,
so we have Bernard and
please,
Christian.
yes.
Bernard and Christian in queue.
And I'm out, and thank you.
There's one thing that's not in the drafts as I've read them, and maybe it's implicit, but I think it's really important, which is the how gaps are addressed. For example, obviously in RTP, we have our TCP where you get this feedback. I'm assuming in MOQ, we don't have the equivalent thing for scalability reasons, but it's not explicitly stated. And for example, on ingest, if I'm sending something, if a frame doesn't get received, is it up to the sender to decide whether to resend it? How does it know? The reason I'm asking this, Cullen, is there's pretty big differences between QUIC and web transport in that respect. If you're running directly over QUIC, there's a lot more information that the application can have about the transport and what got received and what didn't, versus in web transport.
Right. Bernard, I think that's a whole kettle of fish for sure. Now, obviously, if we're running on reliable streams, mostly that question doesn't exist quite the way. It's more of a rate control question of what you subscribe to largely controls what's happening. And from an RTP point of view, you do have reliable retransmit. You have a hop by hop RTX effectively, right? Because that's what the reliable QUIC stream is going to give you. If we're not using QUIC in a reliable way at all, then I think that gets more complicated. And the drafts have carefully avoided, really nailing that down one way or another at this point. So I would definitely leave it, mark as an open issue. But I think most of us envisioned it much like is that the subscribes are the control mechanism. When you ask for a track or an object or ask for a particular group over again, that there are ways to re-request information, and the relays may or may not cache information in a way that they could give it to you. But that was definitely left as fairly open and a bunch of possibilities there. But it was more seen as a hop by hop mechanism in most envisioning of it than a end-to-end mechanism, because for a lot of the use cases, obviously we can't have the equivalent of an FIR frame coming all the way back to the producer at the scalability we want to hit, right? So it's mostly the other direction of it. And the drafts are, you're totally right, the drafts are silent on the topic. I think right now they're fairly open of they wouldn't preclude any of the possible solutions to it.
Well, but I think, as you said, it would be highly undesirable to have this feedback that goes back to the encoder. So if you're not, it would be useful to at least say that you're not going to do that.
Okay, that's excellent feedback, and I suspect that most people would agree with that. So,
yeah, thank you.
Christian.
Good morning. I'd like first to say that I've been participating in this production of this document, and my priority for the last 2 weeks has been that we should get a version of the document and basically have it adopted by the working group, not because it's the best possible document, but because it is good enough and because it is time to have more voices and more eyes on this document than just a subset of authors. And for example, I look at the questions that Bernard is giving us, and that's very good input. And I would very much like that input to arrive from the working group, from Bernard and from others, rather than having a continued discussion of the author in a closed group. So that's one of my main motivation for saying, hey, we should adopt these sooner rather than later, so that we can have an actual working group discussion instead of a restricted set of authors discussion. That's the first reason. Then, yeah, I mean, there are issues. I mean, to Spencer's issue about the MOQ transport name, RTP stands for real-time transport protocol. It's well established that we use transport in a variety of things. And contrary to what Cullen said, UDP is not a transport protocol. It's a pass-through. It's a pass-through. It's never meant to be a transport protocol. It's kind of idiotic to see that as a transport protocol. UDP is a way to give IP visibility to the application. That's it. So, and also, I mean, the point that two points that Bernard were making. The point about the feedback, we punted on that. Yes, we punted on that because of scalability issues. Because, I mean, if you are sending a video to 1 million receivers, I mean, the fact that one of them doesn't receive it completely is kind of a fact of life. It's going to happen, and that's it. But that means pretty much open loop transmission. And if we are using that in a small group, say half a dozen receivers, then it does make sense to get feedback from the individual receivers. That's one of the tension that we have to resolve, and we resolve it probably in the working group. The same thing goes about this business of priorities. I mean, it's very unclear. The handling of priorities and orders is very unclear. We have a temptation that says it shall be entirely defined by the sender, which does make sense in the sending to 1 million receiver scenario, but does not make sense so much in small group scenarios. Suppose that, for example, we have senders sending 10 video streams and a particular receiver is only interested in one of them. I mean, the fact that the receiver is interested for now in one of them and the other one in the background, just to be ready, that has to be expressed somehow. And that means the receiver shall be able to implement the to affect the priorities that are used. So all that, I say that, well, we have many points that will need to be resolved in the working group, but please adopt it so we can actually resolve that in the working group and not in private discussions.
I think we have emptied the queue. Totally agree. And I think we've emptied the queue and are probably at a good end of this. I've probably used up our time.
Thanks,
Okay.
Dylan. Oh, go ahead, Ted.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, okay. So I think next on the agenda, it's Victor talking a little bit about how naming works, since it ended up being something that took a long time for the author team to resolve. You want me to share your slides, Victor?
Please do.
Okay. I see 2 copies. I'm not sure which one is the most recent. Is it the first or last? Well, we'll find out, I guess.
I'm not sure because I only ever mailed one version, so they hopefully are identical.
We'll find out. Okay. Can you see it? Are you good?
I think I can see it. Do I get to control it, or? Okay.
I can set that, or you can ask me to. How do I?
There are 6 slides, so just
Last slides
go.
control.
Okay. So, as Colin has mentioned in the previous presentation, MOQ has a concept of a full track name, which is what you ask for when you subscribe to a track. A track name is so a full track name has 2 parts: track namespace and track name. They are currently defined to be fully opaque blobs that are directly concatenated to form a full track name. There is no specific syntax beyond that. That is all, of course, is subject to a bike chat. So what is the difference between track namespace and a track name? Currently, we don't go much into it in the draft, and it's mostly to the application, but there are 2 notable features. Is that one, when you publish, you only announce a track namespace and not a track name, but when you subscribe to individual tracks. The reason for that is we expect track namespace to basically belong to the same producer, and whenever you publish something, if you publish a video track and an audio track, and you successfully publish a video track and then you fail to publish an audio track, this leaves you in an awkward state, and this decision to publish it, to announce at the namespace level, avoids that. And the second is that in some priority-related proposals, track namespaces are like the boundaries at which the priorities are sent in particular send order. So the important, here are some examples that are copied directly from the draft of how you can structure. One of them is, the first example is for a video conference. The second example is video conference, but like it separates track namespace and track name at a different level. And the third one is an example of what you would do if you have a device you connect to directly. The important property of full track name that makes it different from what you would typically expect, for instance, with HTTP URLs, is that in MOQ transport, we define full track name is like the full name of the track, and there are no extra keys you can add. So the full track name, if you want to cache something, the full track name is your cache key. This means that, like, whenever you talk to a server and you ask for a track, the track gives you that specific track, and there is no content negotiations, there are no extra vary headers, etc. And that significantly simplifies implementing caching. So when I say unique, I said that the full track name is unique. There's a caveat that, well, I'll talk about later. But okay, so the property of the track name is, note that while those examples have domain names and they're meant to be unique, those do not. Those are entirely logical. They do not actually tell you where to connect. The question of where you to connect is entirely orthogonal, and it is determined by a third thing called the connect URL. And the connect URL is just a web transport URL to you connect to, or for RawQuick, we have a special syntax of how you connect to a specific server via RawQuick to speak MOQ transport. And so if you are a client and you have no prior information of how to connect to something, and if you want to fetch some specific track, the 3 bits of information you need is a connect URL, track namespace, and track name. But the latter two are orthogonal to the connect URL. So I mentioned that the track names are unique. There are some requirements to how widely that uniqueness is intended. I don't want to say guaranteed, but how much widely you have to provide the name uniqueness. Specifically, if you want to run a complex application which forwards media between multiple parties, like for instance a video conference with a lot of participants, you want all of the servers to provide you consistent track names, and you want multiple servers so you can connect one CDN node and make sure that like the traffic from that CDN node would reach potentially the other CDN node, because that's how because all you have is a track name which would theoretically tell you this is a video conference and this is the participant, etc. Like that would be inside the track name, but the connect URL, which tells you which CDN server you can connect. So the draft introduces the notion of a scope. A scope is a set of servers to which you can connect and receive the same tracks from the same name. Or you're not guaranteed to always receive them, but if you will receive them, they will be the same track. In very simple point-to-point cases, the scope is just one connection. In cases when you do things like video conferencing, you need all of your nodes to be within the same scope. Otherwise, the video conference will not work. I think that's roughly it. Any questions?
There don't seem to be any questions, which slightly worries me given how much the authors discussed. But on the other hand, maybe should be happy that it means that everybody is very satisfied with the solution. Okay. Thanks, Victor. Something in the chat. Oh, Lucas says he might want to see some examples, but I think those may be forthcoming, as Luke said. So great. So I think next up was Will to talk about catalog and the new streaming format draft. And do you want control of your slides, or should...
Can you share them, but I can remotely control because I have a bunch of clicks and
yeah, let me see. Transport.
If not, I'll just say click a bunch.
Streaming format. Okay, you have 3 copies of the slides, so hopefully this is the one that you want.
Looks good.
And pass control.
Okay, I'll see if I can actually move forward. So good morning, thank you. So Cullen set the stage for our base mock transport, and Victor's told us how we can name tracks within it, but we haven't yet moved media. So this section is about a streaming format and how we can map media to our transport protocol. So unfortunately, the animation didn't build here for the slide sharing, but at the very bottom, we have raw, quick, and rev transport. Layered over that is our media over quick transport. And then on top of it, we have a number of these streaming formats. And as we discussed at the last face-to-face, we may want more than one, because we can either make one that's so complex it meets all use cases, but then we carry this burden and the overhead for our very simple use cases. And on the other hand, we don't want it highly fragmented. So we need to strike a reasonable balance. We want as few as possible of these streaming formats that meet our use cases, while dividing them into groups that allow us to be simple, precise, and efficient within a given set of use cases. And what I'm presenting here is the very first one of these, and we've named it Warp Streaming Format. And its name comes from Luke Curley. It's about 70% of what I'm presenting here comes directly from Luke's initial contribution. So must thank him for that. So at a very high level, it's designed to deliver CMAF packaged content and provide good interop with existing encoders, packaging systems, and player decoders. So CMAF is widely deployed within the adaptive streaming world. It makes a lot of sense to leverage the ecosystem we already have for that distribution, be able to apply it immediately for a mock transport streaming format. There's a focus on live and near live streaming. That's a consensus view. It can also be used for VOD, and I'm personally interested in that, but that's a point we have to debate here. It works at a high level by fragmenting a bit stream into objects. So mock transport provides the objects. What Warp Streaming Format tells you is, how do I take my media and compartmentalize it into those objects? And it uses, for congestion response, a notion of prioritization and send order. These are it can only twiddle the knobs and levers that mock transport provides. And since mock transport has not settled on the knobs and levers yet, this is not defined for Warp Streaming Format, other than we intend to use that to address congestion at relays or at any node that is retransmitting data. So for packaging, you need to encode each bit stream, and that's a media bit stream now, into a sequence of objects, a contiguous sequence of objects. These media tracks should be time aligned. So if you're familiar with CMAP switching sets, they meet this requirement. The idea is that a receiver should be able to cleanly switch media tracks at the group boundaries. So I have a diagram below. We see 3 tracks, our traditional multi-bit rate stack. The dark color in each block indicates an IDR, or the start of the GOP. The idea is that, just like in adaptive streaming, if either the client or server wish to switch in the transmission, it can do so cleanly at the start of any group. And this maps very directly to CMAP switching sets. So what media objects can you place to meet this requirement? So there's flexibility here. At the top level, the group is holding a CMAP fragment, and there's only one object in each group, and it's holding the whole fragment as well. And this isn't entirely feasible and can work very nicely, in fact. And if you have content that's HLS package, this will map directly using this format, where each segment is in fact an object, and there's one object per group. The second level down, the group is still holding a fragment, which is an independently addressable CMAP object. But now we have chunks, and these chunks can be a number of frames. The frame count doesn't matter, but not every trunk is an addressable point. So the first chunk at the start of every fragment is independently decodable. The subsequent chunks are not, but now we have multiple objects per group. And then the next level down, or the ultimate level down on the video side, would be 1 frame per object. So now we might have 30 CMAP fragment that's 1 second long, and we'll have 30 objects per second in that group. The first object holding the keyframe, and the rest being P's and B's. And clearly, frame per object is probably better for real-time delivery, but the spec is not going to dictate you must use one or the other. Any one of these requirements meets the constraint of using CMAP content and making the group start point independently accessible. So now we introduce the notion of a catalog. So a catalog is like a menu or a description of what's available from a given publisher. And it is itself a track. So it's a special track that, when it's published, describes the other tracks. And the catalog's job is to both describe the track content, what's available, as well as give the consumer information that it might need to use to select between various tracks. So it might give you the resolution, the codec, the bitrate, things you need to know to make a choice. It's also going to provide information you need to initialize the decode. In other words, to begin decoding the content on the receiver side. Catalog objects can represent deltas from other prior objects. So if we have a complex offering coming out of a producer, might be producing 10 different streams, and one of them changes, we don't want to replicate all of that information again. So we can simply issue the change as a change from a prior state. So just like tracks have the notion of groups, we can break our catalog into groups as well. So we can have delta updates within a group that apply to previous, or only make sense when combined with previous objects within that group. But every group emission of a catalog should be independent and not rely on prior catalog updates. So on the right-hand side is the syntax denoting the catalog payload. It's a binary one. At the highest level, I was going to build these in the animation, but it dictates the format type. So the idea here is that the catalog as a track, it's simply a set of objects, but the catalog as its very first varent must be unencrypted, and it must hold an IANA registered type. So for warp, we're claiming type 1. So the first varent you see in the payload would be 1. And that tells the receiving client that the rest of the catalog can be interpreted as being a warp streaming catalog, because there can be many catalogs you might receive. So, and since you can always be guaranteed that the first varent defines the type and it's registered, you know how to parse the rest of the object. There's a version, because we might want to change this over time. There's the parent object sequence. This is how we do Delta updates. You simply refer to the object sequence number on which this particular object depends. Then you can have a number of track changes, and each one of them carries a descriptor. For the descriptor, which is a section in green, you specify the full track name. You need its length and then the track name bits. And then there's a single bit flag for the operation. And there's two operations currently defined, either add or delete, which are 1 or a 0. If you're adding a track in this catalog, you supply the initialization header. And CMAP has the init header in CMAP has the very convenient dual property that it both helps you initialize your decoder, and if you parse it, it provides the selection information that you need in order to potentially select that track for consumption. If you want to delete, if a track is being deleted by the publisher, then the deletion header simply publishes the last group and the last object that were emitted by the publisher. And that tells us a receiver if it in fact received the entirety of that track, or if some still stuck in transmission. Trying to click. Oh, let's go this way. So the workflow, again, at a very simple level, a WARP publisher must make available a catalog track after announce and before or concurrently with any media track objects. So you mustn't be firing off tracks that you haven't described in your catalog. And your publisher only pushes content in response to a validated subscribe request. This is core MOQ transport behavior. So we're just inheriting that. And then at the completion of a session, the publisher publishes a catalog that removes all the prior tracks that it previously published. And this should be interpreted by receivers to say the published session is complete. I think we need very precise ways to say when sessions have started and stopped. And this is one proposed solution. Now there's a proposal for how we can join together the connect URI and the notion of the catalog track name. This is just a proposal. And you see there, for an example, we have a single URI, which is a munge of the connect URL and the path. So the client would make, in this case, a web transport connection to that entire string. The server, when it's receiving it, would use some fraction of this to validate. It might hold a token, or it might need to know which customer or account this is being used with. And then the remaining fraction, it would automatically know is the full track name for a catalog. And that way the server can, after the setup is done, it can automatically subscribe the client to that catalog and send the catalog content. So we can remove a round trip of the client needing to subscribe to the catalog. We're not actually removing it because the client could make a parallel subscribe request. However, there is a certain convenience in being able to use the connect URL along with the catalog full track name. This is just a proposal. There's obviously merits for and against this. Another proposal for client-initiated server-side ABR. So the proposal currently does not address at all how a client or a server might want to switch between these tracks as a response to congestion. So we have the intra-track prioritization that we've discussed. However, I might want to switch from my 1080 to my 720 to my 360p content. How would I do that? So one idea here is that in my subscribe message, I append an optional object that says this subscription is part of a group 1, and I set a throughput level. Now, we don't want too many variables, but throughput is one thing perhaps we can standardize around. So clearly, I set the throughput level here, and as soon as this ABR object is sent on the subscribe, the server's task is to make forward subscriptions to all of this content, cache all of this content as it's received, but then only forward through the track which is matching the throughput estimate at the time. And it has to make the switches on the group boundaries as we've previously discussed. So there's reasons why this can work, reasons why this cannot work. Again, this is just a proposal for how the client might ask the server to send it the most appropriate track at any time. The client could obviously make this subscription decision itself and switch, but there's an idea that we might want to have this on the server. There's a lot of things still to solve with this, and you can read them, but I'll quickly go through them. Prioritization strategy. This is somewhat not somewhat, it's very dependent on what MOQ offers, but even once MOQ offers it, how should warp streaming format use that? We need to define an ABR strategy. Maybe it's client side, maybe it's server side. And if it's that server side one I just showed, that has to be part of core MOQ as well, because it's a core requirement that every relay is going to need to offer up. Should track names be strings? All the examples we've shown, they are strings, although as Cullen mentioned, they're just binary blobs. So maybe for warp streaming format, we want to constrain them to be strings because that's so much easier for us to work with. And if so, we need to specify the wire protocol for those. This is a big one, number 4. Can catalogs hold content from different track namespaces? So as soon as we allow this, there's additional complexity, but there's use case reasons where this might make sense. So we need to explore catalogs not literally being a directory. If your catalog simply held the track name and it could infer the track namespace from the catalog path, just like we do with HLS or Dash, then they would all be relative to that and I could move them around. We know that works at scale. That might be something we want to look at, yeah, but that would prohibit using different track namespaces. Number 5, should common group numbers hold media time sync data? That's somewhat implicit in what I just described when you could switch between groups. But if I switch from group 5 and track A to group 5 and track B, is there a hard requirement that the media time is identical between those two? With CMAF switching sets, it would be, but we need to state that explicitly. Number 6, do we need a reserved name for catalog tracks? The reserved name is useful because a client, without knowing anything else about the content, can always ask for a catalog. It's a reserved name, and then it can get a bunch of tracks. However, in that naming syntax I showed you, it doesn't necessarily need to end with catalog. It could have ended with alpha 1, 2, 3. It's simply a track that happens to describe other tracks. So do we need the reserved name for it? Number 7, content protection. There's an open issue for this. Number 8, I believe we should try to standardize content protection for this from day one to prevent the split we've had in adaptive media where we have multiple incompatible cipher modes that are out there and therefore silos of content. But which format to go for is open to debate. Issue 13, do we want to relax the CMAF packaging requirement? That's a big change to this protocol. This protocol was designed to leverage CMAF and its industry ubiquity, but there's good reasons for allowing other protocols, non-CMAF compliant codecs, for example, to be used. Hanshi has raised number 9. What about SVC support? So we speak about ABR switching, and there's many models here that are compatible with the adaptive switching world. But as we moved into a layered distribution, how do we describe the relationships between these tracks? Do we want that? Do we want to increase what warp streaming format offers, or do we want to make another streaming format that is dedicated to SVC-based distribution? And that's a big debate for the group. And then last one I'll mention here, number 7, do we want to support multiple catalog types within a streaming format? So there is still a lot of dissension about this notion that a streaming format has one catalog associated with it. And there are some people who have asked for, I want multiple catalog types. These are all debates to have, and we can't answer them all right now, but I'll stop here. This is the end of the section. Happy to take questions, and I haven't been looking at the chat at all.
Okay, James is first in the queue.
Thank you very much for the question, Will. Just to clarify, back at the catalog section, you said that there's an identifier of it, and you've put number 1 as first. This is a bit of a clarifier, and I'm sure Cullen will want to chime in and correct me here. But what we're saying is that the for a client identifying what format, whether it's warp or some other, that's happening in the format itself and not part of mock transport. And if that's the case, does that not imply that all formats must start with this kind of structure, at least to identify what it is and to figure out whether or not it can actually make sense of it or use it?
So yes, what I proposed was you can invent whatever catalog format you like with one particular requirement. The first var-ent must hold a number, and that number must identify a registered type, and that type tells you how to parse the rest of the catalog. With that in place, a client can receive any catalog and know how to parse it, assuming it's compliant with parsing, it recognizes the type. Or else it could say, I don't recognize this type, I can't parse this catalog.
Is it
the
then
argument
not?
against this is the client typically knows what format it's asking for when it's given something. When an HLS client doesn't inspect the M3U8 and check to see if it's dash formatted, right? It just expects it to be M3U8 and it throws an error if it can't pass it. That also works. So we could get rid of this consistent registration as long as we're willing to accept that each client must know the type of format it's asking for before it asks for it.
I guess the point that I'm trying to put here, not just to yourself, but also to the working group, is this what we want given, or do we expect implementations to only implement one streaming format or such, or how are we going to address negotiation of the formats? And I don't have any suggestions. I just want to put that on the table and say, because the answer to that question will have a huge steer on whether or not this is the right way to go or not.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think during setup, the publisher could say, I'm publishing 2 formats at the same time, or I'm only publishing 1. And as part of the setup, the client could be told what formats are available. The question will then be, how do you ask for the specific format? How do I ask for the catalog of type 1? We haven't addressed that yet, but that's a great idea.
Okay, Cullen?
Will, I was going to ask if you could just talk for a minute about the sort of more generic version of this. So if somebody is writing a new streaming format, what are the things they need to define in it? And I'm trying to sort of, scope this work from a sort of adopting point of view and that type of stuff. Like what's the key things that need to be defined in any one of these that writes one of these?
In any streaming format, you need, again, the idea was you would define how to identify your catalog type. So you would write a catalog that at least the first var-ent was a number to be consistent with mock, if we go that way. Then you also need to find how you map your objects to the core mocked messages. In other words, announce how to subscribe and announce and publish map to the workflow behavior within your streaming format. And how does your media, the binary media payload, map to the objects that are being transmitted? And then you need to define the workflow issues around how do you authenticate it? How do you encrypt it consistently? How do you signal the level of encryption? What type of error messages do you expect that are particular to your application and not particular to mocked? I would think these are the things any streaming format would need to provide.
That makes sense. Thanks.
And maybe there's some of them we need to bake a few requirements into mock transport itself, which says if you're going to make a streaming format, you must do a couple of things, and then we list as few things as possible. But by doing that, we get interop, right? We get interoperable streaming formats, and that should be the ultimate goal.
Suhas.
Thanks, Will, for the presentation. I think this is a good start. Given that Mo and I've been working on how do we do like the point that you made on having other streaming formats that is more real-time friendly. And going back to Cullen's question, I think if we can, I'm just asking you in general, would it help if it makes sense to have, if anyone who wants to define a container or a streaming format, this is what you should do as a catalog format as a separate thing on its own. and then we have the what as seeing how CMAF will be used, and the other thing, the lock, which we are called overhead container, will they'll say how that will be used. Would that make have the split that way? Generic anyone who wants to have a streaming format or container format defined, they all define the same way. The catalogs, things in the catalogs should be defined too.
So yeah, I'll give my personal view on this. There's been an idea that should we write RFCs that describe all the various packaging formats, so that when I want to create a streaming format, I pick an off-the-shelf packaging format, and I pick a addressing syntax, and I take those and off I go. We can certainly do that. My opinion is that the packaging is part and parcel of the streaming format, and I'm not convinced there's enough repetition or repeat use of a precise packaging format that it warrants breaking it out into a separate spec. We already have CMAF. It's an established body of work. We can just anyone who wants to use CMAF can make a little reference and incorporate it in their document. Do I need another RFC saying I'm incorporating CMAF? In CMAF's case, I don't think so. For maybe more advanced formats that are particular or unique to MOQ transport that we develop, that might warrant a separate content. I'm not opposed to it at all, and I think this is a core discussion we should have. Should these streaming formats become basically an assembly of other RFCs that define naming and packaging, and they're basically just telling which of these are going to work together? It's definitely something to consider.
Okay, Martin.
Hi, thanks for this. I just want to understand the positioning of this. So the idea here is that, presumably this would be an internet draft, and it would propose one possible an example of a streaming format that could exist on top of it, MOQ transport. But any streaming format would have to have this common variant at the beginning to define the streaming format in use. But then, of course, other documents could follow this template. Is that accurate?
There can be a multiplicity. Like if I was writing a VR or AR format, I think it would look there would be enough differences that I wouldn't want to try to expand this to support equirectangular distribution of tile-based media. I think I would make a separate one for that.
Lovely. So that sounds to me like a straightforward and the correct separation of functions in what the work we're doing here. So that's good. It just is a minor nit. I wonder if that catalog variant byte should go into the transport, just because, well, just conceptually it seems to make sense to me that the transport should have that thing that says here's the pointer that tells you what streaming format to implement. So that's kind of a nit. Thanks.
It might, except I could conceivably have objects that were part of two streaming formats for some reason, and then would I carry both bits in it? But yeah, we could add a header to every object saying what streaming format it's part of. That would be fine. We could also get rid of that variant. We could just invent unique names for the catalog, and that would let me call a particular type of format that I might want from a client when multiple are available on the publisher. These are all to be debated.
I guess my point is I think there should be some sort of pointer in the MOQ transport that tells you what the streaming format is, rather than having me defined in the stream format document. This is basically just a document quibble, so
okay.
That's enough. Thanks.
Victor?
I have two comments. One is about how we identify which format, and I feel like there are multiple strategies, but the deciding thing will be it's not just a pure bike shit. We have to figure out how, if a client supports multiple formats and it doesn't know what it can request, or by contrast, if the server can offer multiple formats, what happens then? And I believe that is the guiding problem for what specifically we should end up picking. And since I said it's an interaction that would probably have to go into transport. The second thing is about whether warp should be tied to CMAF. I don't think it should be, and in fact, at least draft 04 version, the previous version, did not have that limitation. Specifically, the observation here is that in order to define a stream, like a media container thing that's layered onto mock, you usually need only two things. You need things that goes in the catalog and that tells you how to decode, and then you need to things that goes into the objects themselves. And I believe the original draft calls them the init object format and the object format. But the observation here is that that is a problem that is mostly orthogonal to saying questions of how do we add tracks, how do we remove tracks, how do we change the catalog, and how do we tell the ABR properties.
Yep, I agree with you on both points. I'd be open to expanding this to include non-CMAF based packaging. I think that's reasonable. It doesn't only have to be CMAF, and there's, as you point out, there's not that, assuming my packaging is reasonably consistent and I maintain the notion that I can switch at group boundaries, then why not have alternate packaging schemes and or codecs that are non-CMAF compliant be included? I think that's very reasonable.
To clarify, there are the two roles of the header is we currently, the reason where the draft is so focused in CMF is that you can reuse a lot of things that CMF does in terms of things like how do I identify which track is audio and what the audio the track disposition if you're doing more than two channels, which is something that's when you roll your own container, you have to answer a lot of questions like that. But that doesn't mean we have to use CMF always for that. That just means we have to specify the properties that you require from your streaming format. Your streaming format has to tell you, provide you some language selection if that is one of the features you rely on.
Yep.
Go ahead, Mo.
Yes, I like how this ended up. I greatly like the approach of having the catalog itself as tracks. So I think this is going in the right direction. I do wonder, though, whether or not people have digested the differences between only describing the catalog formats versus describing the actual media formats. So we're kind of implicitly saying, if the RTP analogy would be, we're defining RTP payload types, but not for any of the media. We're defining RTP payload types for the catalog itself. And then the catalog spec would tell you what the underlying media types actually are. And there's a little bit of, there's still a little bit of open issue there to me, because those specs, it's not clear whether they would also be forward facing. Like if somebody created AV2 bindings for CMAF, does that mean because you support the CMAF streaming format, you support AV2? So those kinds of issues about maybe the version or something like that, maybe the version of each streaming format spec can be upgraded, but does that mean we have to constantly rev all of those as new codecs come on board? Those kinds of questions are still kind of fuzzy to me, but I think this is generally going in the right direction. We need to get to those details next.
Yeah, I agree on both points. On the versioning side, yes, I put a version flag in there because as CMAF evolve or as anything evolves, different versions of this draft of this RFC would support different codec combinations. We don't want to imply an automatic adoption with future ones, so we do need to constrain it either through profiles or through versioning. Is how it's typically done. And on your first point, to be clear, there isn't a separate catalog RFC, right? The idea, and maybe it can be challenged, is that there's a streaming format RFC. One of the things is described as how the catalog is written, and what its components are. And then it also describes the packaging and the interrelationship. That's all bundled up within one RFC.
Right. I didn't mean the RFC. I meant like Martin's point about where is this going to be registered? These variants for identification, are we only identifying the streaming format RFC as the thing? So that means only certain tracks, specifically only the catalog tracks would have identifying information, and the actual media tracks, you wouldn't really know how to identify those unless you first looked at the identifier for the catalog track. So are we only going to register streaming formats, or are we also going to register the actual media formats?
I think we only need to register the catalogs, because that's the only that's where you want to stop people putting the same ID bit in the same place and meaning two different things. So we need registration. In terms of the media, I don't believe we need to register that. It doesn't matter. It's once I know my format, I'm just transmitting AV content. I don't need flags to tell me that this is CMAF. I know it's CMAF because I asked for it based on a catalog that told me its packaging, its codec, its resolution, everything I need to know about it. I don't think we need to repeat that in every object.
I tend to agree. It just kind of breaks the symmetry of all these things are just tracks. And if you can identify the catalog tracks, deterministically and have a pointer to an RFC for them, but you can't do that for the actual media tracks, it seems a little odd, but I'm willing to live with that.
Okay, and I'm willing to talk about it, so thanks.
Oh, Ted, looked like you jumped in and then jumped out of the queue.
Yeah, it was covered.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, I think that was a good discussion. Thank you, Will, for bringing this draft and presenting it. Should we move on to Luke's presentation?
Sounds good.
Okay. Oops. Where'd it go? Why can't I share preloaded slides? There we go. Yours is called Mock Flows, is that right?
This is called Mock Flows. It was 2 a.m. I couldn't come up with a cool title or a cool title slide, so this is the best you got.
All right. And I pass control off to you.
Okay. Cool. Hello, everybody. Wake up. I'm tired. I made a mistake of drawing these slides again, but hopefully it's fun. So I want to go over how media and data in general, it's not media specific. I think that's the thing with mock transport is, yeah, there's media in the name, mock transport, but this could be any data. It could be chat messages, it could be a catalog, it could be media, whatever. I just kind of wanted to cover what actually happens. What's an end-to-end flow when somebody's producing media to going through relays to consuming it. So in an example, we have a producer's OBS. They want to publish some media, and we have a consumer, VLC, and they want to consume that media. These are two separate entities. It could be other side of the world, and they're both configured with some upfront information based on the service. Right now, it's the connect URL, basically where you connect to establish the connection. Track namespace, what do you publish versus what do you request, and then auth that goes with that track namespace. The auth could be part of the connect URL, like you could encode it in there, or you could have it as a separate field. I'd like to reduce these down to like maybe 1 or 2 pieces of information we give to everybody, so you don't have to sit there and fill out 8 fields in OBS if you want to go live. But this is how it is today. So here's an example of what a symmetric situation looks like, where both the producer and the consumer have the same configuration. So a URL, I just made one up, webex.akamai.com. This is what you actually connect to establish the connection. In this case, it's web transport because it has the HTTP prefix protocol. A namespace. I took one of the Google meeting codes, and that's my namespace. So it's unique within that connect URL. And then I add the participant at the end, just as a way of saying, like, I am John Cena, or I'm publishing on behalf of, or consuming John Cena's feed. And then an auth token that says if you have permission to publish or consume at that given namespace. So this is symmetric. This is the case for same for the producer and the consumer. Super easy. It works in some situations for sure, but it's the easiest thing to talk about and conceptually understand. So what do we do with this information? Well, the first thing is we've got to connect to that URL we were given. So the URL is broken into 3 pieces. This is just the standard URL stuff. It's a protocol, host, path. We use the host name to establish the quick connection. The protocol decides if we use web transport or if we do native quick. Basically, if it's we just do the web transport handshake if it's in there. But in both cases, we do a little mock setup, which includes the path. So we have all the information regardless of whatever protocol you use. So you can support both mechanisms seamlessly. I wanted to avoid a world where only web transport has the path. We put the path in the setup message if you're using native quick. So we've established a connection to a host. Here's the full, I forgot about this slide. Here's the full diagram if you care about which packets are being sent. We're adding the blue at the bottom mock, which is just a little setup frame that the client sends first and then the server replies. It's very similar to the web transport connect request and response. And it can be sent in parallel if you have a good implementation. That's that little asterisk there. Anyway, we got a connection. The producer needs to tell the server, like let's say a client is connecting, like OBS is connecting to some ingest server. It has this mechanism to say, by the way, here's that namespace I was told to produce. So it sends this extra message and says, hey, here's the namespace you told me to publish with, and here's auth. And then the other side says yes or no it's an announce okay or error. And I should have clarified as well. Green is just the producer, the person trying to send the media, and red is the consumer or the other end. So in this case, the producer says, hey, I want to publish this namespace. I want to announce it. And the other side says sure thing or not. We'll talk about the announce a little bit because it's not necessarily symmetrical, but we'll get there. But that's really all you need for the producer to be ready. So OBS connected to a server. It said, hey, I want to publish this track, this WebEx track. I'm John Cena. Nobody's requested it yet, but it's technically valid. It is a live stream. And yeah, namespace is effectively track bundle, Martin Duke. It's just a different name and different conceptually because it's not tied to a web transport session. Anyway, we have a subscribe request. So the consumer finally decides they want to actually watch the media. Maybe it's the first viewer, or maybe the transcoder started up or something. And it will send a subscribe request. It chooses a track ID, although I'd like to probably rename that. It gives it 6. It's a way of a shorthand number to say, from now, if you send any objects that are marked 6, I know that it's part of the subscription. You send the namespace, either the one that you're configured to subscribe to or the one that you received from the announce. That's kind of why I say it's not quite symmetrical or symmetric. And then the name, you subscribe. You need the catalog. The catalog, as we've discussed, describes other tracks. Well, you need to know how to request it. That's currently undefined. It could be with like having a well-known name like catalog as the string, or we could use some sort of track format, some way of deciding that this is a catalog track, so I should request it to learn about other tracks. And of course, you can send auth if you want. So yeah, the VLC sends a subscribe. It says, give me the catalog. And the other side says, sure, I'll start doing that. So the producer starts pushing objects with the given requested track ID. So in this example, they requested track ID 6 for some reason. Let's just use that. This is just a little way of compressing so we don't send the full string as every object. And then we start saying, here's group 15, object 0, group 15, object 1. The subscribe message has an optional hint of which group to start at. But if that's not provided right now, it's kind of assumed. I think it might be explicitly spelled out that it needs to be the latest group, but it's implicit, and we should probably figure that out. Anyway, you just start sending object messages after the subscribe. So we talked about a little bit about the catalog track. I wanted to talk about it a little bit more. It's just a track that describes other tracks. This is maybe where this is a little different than bundle. In bundle, I had this very clear, like a catalog describes the entire bundle, but now it's kind of vague, or catalog can describe other namespaces. We haven't figured it out. This is a big TBD, and it's not part of the draft right now. This is not part of mock transport. The relay doesn't know that catalogs exist. This is in media encoding parameters, and this is for the consumer only, the catalog. So OBS creates this. It says, here's, what each track contains, and VLC reads this. Relay should not read this at all. It should not parse this catalog track. It could be encrypted. So yeah, we still need to do that. Here's just a quick example of what data it contains. So let's say we have 3 tracks. We have the name of each of these tracks. We call it HD, SD, and audio. This is what actually gets sent with the subscribe message. So the consumer VLC will be like, subscribe SD. And the relay will forward that. It won't know what the contents of SD are. It just knows how to forward that to the producer. And then it will contain some other information that actually describes the contents of the track, like which codec it uses, what resolution. So the consumer, again, VLC, you could know like, I don't actually support AV1. I should request the SD track instead. So this is just like a little, it gives choice, is the catalog. You can think of it that way. It's a way of announcing what is supported. Bad choice of words. It's a way of advertising what's supported. And we have to figure out what format this uses. I had some examples at the bottom. Move is what warp is. Like we just use the existing MP4 spec. But you could use the HLS dash playlist. You could use something custom. We could make this JSON encoded. Or this is kind of like SDP. There's a lot of existing standards that try to describe what multiple media tracks look like. I don't want to rabbit hole too much over what the format is, and let's support multiple ones. So once we know the catalog, we VLC receives the catalog. It parses it. It figures out that there's this HD SD track. It'll come back and make a new subscription. This time with a new ID. I'm calling this subscribe ID, but in the draft it's called track ID. The namespace, we haven't figured this out, but it could be relative to the catalog and then it's the same namespace as the catalog, or it could be something wholly different. It could be like an absolute equivalent of if it's a relative URL versus an absolute URL. Don't know, but I'd like the support for using the same namespace. And then the other side says, sure. So what's really missing here, and this is probably the thing that's most confusing, I think, with this whole thing, is how relays actually handle this. We got one side that says announce. I'm willing to support this track namespace, and I connect to some URL. And you get another side that says I want to subscribe to this track namespace. How on earth do relays consolidate them? So the first thing I want to make clear is that the connect URL changes on every hop. It has to, because it contains the host to connect to. It can't be the same across every host. It could be different protocols too. So the connect URL will change at every hop. And it's up to a relay to have a routing table to know that if somebody connects to this URL and requests this resource, I need to go to this other server to get that resource. But with the relative track names, you can also rewrite the namespace. That's completely optional. And here's one example that I would personally do. That's why I wanted to do it. Where OBS would be given a connect URL that is connect to mock with live.twitch.tv/kixelated and some namespaces, some random thing to make sure you can tell unique broadcasts apart. That does not need to be the same thing that's given to VLC. In fact, VLC is given in Twitch's case, and is given an edge in San Francisco and livevideo.net, and the namespace contains routing information in it, like which origin it's at, some unique ID, blah, blah, blah. So this is the same broadcast, but either end of the pipeline are configured with different information. Again, completely optional. It's up to, in this case, Twitch's CDN to figure out how I map a connect URL and namespace to the origin and to the ingest side, and it can rewrite. So quick recap. This is just like the high level flow. So we set up the connection. We send a setup. This is for contributions. This is when a client OBS is publishing to some ingest server somewhere. You set up the client always sends a setup message, and then it will send an announce and say, here's the track namespace I want to produce. The other side says, sure, give me that catalog. The client says, sure, here's the catalog as object 0. And then if a request comes in later, somebody wants to receive like the HT track, then there will be a follow-up subscribe to actually get that track. So this is really cool because you can have a case where a client connects to an ingest server and doesn't send anything until it's asked to send data. So you can imagine a broadcast with no viewers, or a conference call that has no other participants. Like everything's established, the catalog's published, it's subscribed, but it's not pushing any data yet. It's not pushing data until somebody asks for it with a subscribe. For the distribution side, the client is connecting to a server. Again, VLC is connecting to a server request. It's still the setup message, but the roles have flipped. So now the server, this is debated. The announce is really only used in contribution case, but if it's symmetrical, then it should also work for distribution, where the server can say, by the way, here's a track namespace I'm willing to provide. And the client, either it's told that which track namespace or is configured to. That's kind of why I say announce is optional. Then the client says, give me the catalog, subscribe, send it as object 0. And then eventually can request the proper media track once it's parsed the catalog. And then finally, here's both sides. It's a mess. But I think it's just really important to visualize that this is not meant to be a contribution or distribution protocol. This is meant to be both simultaneously. So they don't share any number namespaces. So subscribe 0, both sides can send subscribe 0, and it will work just fine. Yeah, that's all I got. I know it's a lot, but any questions?
Thanks, Luke. I'm not seeing anybody jump into the queue. Hopefully that means that after talking about it for an hour and a half and reading the drafts, people are understanding how it's supposed to work. Anybody want to jump in and ask questions? Okay. The next part of our agenda was sort of just an open discussion. I know we're a little bit behind, I think, what we originally said for time, but some of that discussion has happened as we've gone along. So, but if people want to just have general discussion about the drafts, the examples, how this is supposed to work, now is your moment. Okay. I think Ted told me, oh, here comes Martin Duke. I was about to say, Ted told me that we would definitely fill 50 minutes of discussion. So, Martin, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna have 50 minutes worth of comment, but just in terms of the way forward. So it sounds like the deliverables of this group will be the MOQ. I mean, assuming something like the MOQ transport draft, and then at least one format draft like the warp one, and maybe more if other people want to make them. Is there something else that we expect to produce?
I see Colin jumping in. I believe we may be chartered also to produce an architecture draft, and I don't have the, and then so, but maybe,
all right, well,
Colin answer.
Yeah, there's a requirement that you might choose to publish or not, I guess.
Right.
That could become an architecture draft. Sure, Colin.
All I was going to mention it is, I mean, I will pitch at some point. I'm a fan of publishing the requirements drafts purely as incentive to cause people to create good requirements drafts. But I think they're valuable. But that's it. You've heard that whole conversation.
Yeah, the person has to read those. I'm most excited, but sure.
You don't have to read them. I keep telling the ISG, don't read them. But yeah, no, I understand. But anyway, I think that topic will bubble up at some point, but not really relevant here.
Okay, so it sounds like our way forward is to, well, we have an MOQ draft, which I guess we can possibly adopt in the near term. Is there a suitable warp draft floating around that I missed for the format purposes?
Oh, Martin, I suddenly lost you. The answer to your question is yes, there is. I don't think the draft was published, or it wasn't recently, but there is a link to Will's repo, which does have a draft in it. And I saw, of course, I was answering that question when you were gone, Martin. I don't know if you heard me or not.
No, I heard you. I just cut off my camera and then I realized that disturbed everything.
Yeah, no, I'm just glad to know that your house has not been leveled. Yeah, okay. So that hopefully answered. I saw Will jump in the queue. Will, did you want to address that or say the same thing?
Yeah, he put a link up.
Yeah, I put a link. It's not reviewed or published, but you can read through the HTML. Its purpose is to form a base for the discussions of how we structure a media format. It's not in any way saying that this is the final version.
So I said it before, but I guess I'll repeat. I mean, I think this seems like a sensible. I've read the mock transport thing, but not this work media thing, as you might imagine. But it seems like from what has been explained, this is a reasonable separation of functionality on the two documents, and I think we should progress towards adopting both, or some form of both. Thanks.
Okay, Suhas, sorry we jumped over you there, but you have the floor.
I wanted to kind of say that a couple of us will be submitting an updated version of the low overhead container draft that would kind of reflect catalog changes and some of the like the payload header that might be useful for some of the real-time use cases. And also we'll plan to update the architecture spec to reflect the new mock transport changes for IETF 117. Those would be probably landing in before that. Thanks.
Okay, great. Looking forward to seeing those. Spencer.
I'm glad that I went after Suhas. I just as a request of the group, especially people who have drafts floating around, if you could make sure that the GitHub repo that you're using for your draft is included in the draft, that would be great. Martin Thompson's template for IDs like produces that semi-automatically. Just it puts it up at the top of the drafts. But if I see a draft that looks cool, but I don't know where to look at it in the repo or see the most recent editor version or something like that, it's harder for people to contribute. So that's just a request to people who are working on drafts that they're hoping to contribute. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Spencer. Anyone else have generic thoughts, or Ted, do you want to kick off a discussion about adoption?
I thought you were going to ask me to fill the 50 minutes, and I was preparing that.
Ted, will you be willing to vamp for approximately 20 to 25 minutes?
I'm not sure that I'm the right person to vamp, but I could certainly fill the past any number of minutes with things that have failed spectacularly in the past in terms of either just the IETF or industry as a whole. But let's skip that because we're not going to be one of the things that fails spectacularly, and instead move forward to the question of how we do the adoption. So I did not hear anybody in today's meeting who sounded like they were opposed to us issuing a call for adoption, which of course goes to the list for the transport draft. I think the moment has come where I will ask explicitly, is there anybody who thinks that the chair should not issue a call for adoption for the transport draft? Okay, seeing none, you can expect the chairs to issue same in short order. The requirements draft, as you will have already seen, is now an official working group draft. So we don't have to issue another call for that because that's already done. So the question really comes to the media draft. I think the media draft is important for us to have available because, as people have noticed, there are some things which might fall naturally in the transport draft or the media draft, and we have to think about where they go. So even though the working group has not seen this particular split before, and even though this is currently an example rather than the only way to do this, I think personally the right thing to do is to go ahead and adopt it and know that it may simply have either a higher level of change or some adaptive radiation into multiple graphs describing different container formats. So I guess my question to the working group with Cullen first in queue is, knowing that it might be the first of several, does anybody object to us going ahead and bringing it in to a working group repo so that we can work on it together? And if you don't feel my thumb on the scale there, I will turn on my thing for just a moment and send the video of me putting, I have to find it, putting my thumb down so you know what my personal opinion is. But we have several people in queue now: Cullen, Spencer, and Lucas. Cullen, you're first.
So first of all, to answer your direct question, I mean, absolutely no problem with bringing it into a working group GitHub repo. I think all of our stuff should be there from the beginning, and we should give access to anybody who wants to write anything in it. Like, have a nice day, right? That's the whole point of GitHub. So yeah, +1 on that. But I don't think I don't think a draft that hasn't even hit the draft repo yet is ready for working group adoption. And more specifically, I think we have 2 drafts here that we're probably going to want to adopt at the same time. And I think they're getting close to ready, but I've been encouraging, I want a chance to go in common and work on those. And I wanted to focus all my attention on getting the base transport draft in first. So I would appreciate a bit of time to actually go work on those drafts, like, get them submitted to the repo, for example, before we did call for adoption on them. And I'm referring to both lock and warp, both of those drafts for that. And yeah, I mean, I think that we should get that in same order. And do I have a problem with moving them, moving that work to be in a common repo for the working group? But yeah, we should have done that from day one. Everything should be there.
Spencer. Spencer, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's because I didn't realize that you had called on me yet. So just a note to the team here that the requirements draft is not in a GitHub in the working group GitHub repo, and that so not in the MOQ GitHub organization, I think is the way, or IETF organization. So we should plan to move that as soon as you all have a repo set up. Is that right?
There is a repo set up now, so it's the repo that we have available. We can definitely move that in whenever you're ready.
Yeah, this is Alan. We can definitely take an action to move the requirements draft over to the MOQ-WG organization.
Cool. Like I say, let James and I know if we can help. I don't do this often, but I have done it before. So, but thank you,
Lucas.
Hello. My audio is probably pretty bad because I'm on a bad computer. But just quickly, personally, I think it's just a bit too early for a media document. Just because, like, I haven't even seen one, and I hear there's two now, and there's some time to read them and see, like, yeah, we could adopt it and say we're going to throw this away, but I just don't see why we need to do that right now. Maybe in a few months' time or whatever, like after the next IETF, where we made like a bit more progress. At that point, whatever, there's two or things. I think that the approach you outlined, Ted, is good. I just think it's slightly too early to make an adoption call for those things. Cheers.
Okay, Colin.
I just want to be clear on a move to, particularly with the warp, the repo that was warp and now became transport. It has so many open issues on it and so much discussion. I want to really move that one so that we don't lose all that, would be my one request. I don't care about the other repos. People may think it's good to do it or what, but if we move this one, I'd prefer to move it if that's possible, so that we don't lose the issues and the discussion and the history, basically.
Yeah, thanks. I personally am a huge fan of preserving all history when possible. So that's my preference as well.
Yep. So I don't see any. Oh, somebody else pop in the queue. I don't see anybody else in queue. So what I'm hearing is folks would be happy with an interim step where we asked Will, as the author of this draft, or the LOC authors, to both rev the draft and publish into the Internet Drafts directory the current version of whatever they think they're ready to have in the drafts directory, and at the same time then move whatever they've just published into the MOQ working group organization. And so we would not change it to draft IETF-MOQ at that point and make it formally adopted, but we would have a single GitHub repository, so that if there were issues that, for example, people wanted to raise against it, they only had to go to that one repo and subscribe to the individual pieces they cared about. So that's what I'm hearing as the result of this discussion. Is there anybody who thinks that's not a fair summary?
Ted, I just want to make sure you're precise on something here, because I heard things that sort of like, we will have multiple, each draft will have its own repo inside of the working group org, right? That's our plan of record. I just want to make clear on that, because it sounded like you were thinking they'd be in the same repo, which I don't think they will be. Like,
they'd all be under github.com/moq-wg.
Right, which is an org, not a repo.
Right.
Yeah, perfect. Sounds good.
Okay. Is there anybody who has an objection to that way forward? Okay, so an action item for Will and for the LOC authors to go ahead and publish into the Internet Drafts directory whatever you think the current state of play is, and then share with the chairs the source you'd like to have put into the repos under the MOQ-WG org. In the meantime, the chairs will issue the call for adoption for the transport draft, and we'll move, with the help of James and Spencer, the existing requirements draft under the same org. James, you joined the queue.
Just to be clear, for relocating or transferring repositories into the working group, just as a note, you'll have to give myself and presumably for the other repos, the owners, permissions in the working group organization in order to transfer it all across, because we definitely want to take the issues and all the history over along for the ride.
Right. So we'll have to work with you offline to get that done. I don't think we're going to do it while people watch. As amusing as it might be to have that all recorded and put onto YouTube, I think we probably won't do that. So we'll do that.
We can
offline.
do that, Ted. We can do that in the next interim. It will be awesome.
Okay. Thanks for letting me know that you're going to be doing that in the next interim. I might let Alan handle that one by himself then. Okay. I think that closes off this item on the agenda. Alan, do you want to talk about next steps / prep for hackathons, et cetera?
Well, do you want to jump ahead? I think we had the requirements draft folks next on the agenda, if I'm remembering it correctly.
You are correct. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the agenda. And so the next thing would be the requirements.
Okay, Spencer, you want me to share your slides? Transport.
This is Spencer, and I think I was asking to share my screen.
Oh, you wanted to share your screen?
If that's okay.
Absolutely, since I couldn't find your slides anyway.
Okay, and
I think you have to ask, and then I approve.
Sounds like a deal. And let me start a slideshow so that I have something to ask about. And I am asking you to share the screen. And just for the people who are taking notes, I am not taking notes for this right now, so please do. Oh, and it asks, do I really want to share my screen? Yes, I do. Cool. And okay, cool. Sorry. Takes a minute to figure out where I am here, but I think I'm here. So anyway, James and I wanted to just let people know what was going on with the use cases and requirements draft, which we always call the requirements draft. Sorry. So this has been adopted, and this is just the details on the adoption poll and the feedback we got, and us replying to the comments on the mock mailing list. And then we submitted -05 version May 31st last week. We were closing, so in our repo, tags mean something. We closed all the issues that were tagged for adoption in the GitHub repo, and so if you click on those links in the presentation that's in the meeting materials, you see that. And we provided the diffs for 04 to 05, and then the diffs from 05 to the 00 working group draft, and that was submitted June 5th, which was 2 days ago, and the chairs approved that. So that's how we got where we are, and so let's talk about where we're going. So one of our labels that we're using is current author focus, which is authors that are working on PR text. And one of the things that we had talked about in Yokohama, we had the suggestion from Bernard that a significant portion of the draft called Exploration of Mock Scenarios and Data Model would be better placed in the use case and requirements draft. And we agreed with that. We just haven't done that, waiting for adoption of our draft, just so we're not just randomly moving text around between individual contributions. So we agree with that and be working on PR text for that. Also, we have an issue called how how many ends are involved in end-to-end security. We've been hand waving about end-to-end security since before we were chartered, and the tension here is about what intermediate devices know about payloads. I think for my understanding of where we are in the protocol drafts is that we have a lot better understanding of the nuances there. But just for us to because we have a section about security and end-to-end security in the requirements section of our draft, just basically making sure that we can explain to people what that means, so that they understand what to look for in the requirements on that. Any questions on that? If none, and if people can jump in anytime. So for priority for discussion as a label, we're using basically that we need other issues to be resolved first. One that we've had using terminology correctly for relays and caching and replication points and media translators, which, if I remember correctly, those were the things that are named in the charter. Now that we have an architecture draft, and we have from Savath, we have also architectural kinds of things that are now in the the mock transport draft. That seems like a really reasonable start to produce the architecture draft that we are chartered to produce. And this is something that I want to contribute to, because it's kind of gating for a lot of the things we want to say in the use case and especially requirements draft. We want to describe, if there's a requirement, we want to be able to describe what it's a requirement on, so that people know how it fits in with everything else. We've had maybe a not terrifically important issue, but that's becoming more important, about the use of BCP 14 language for requirements in our draft. So two things to be sure and mention about this is our thinking is that mock requirements in our draft apply to the way a mock system works, and that mock protocol specifications may have their own requirements that are specific to that, to that protocol or to that format, or whatever we're doing. And any thoughts on this one yet? So we've got label IETF-117, and the goal is to label the PR. Basically, we're targeting PR text for 117. An easy one is that we reread -05 after we submitted it, and we had proudly announced that we were going to submit -05 as the working group 00 draft with no changes, and but we do have a largely editorial issue that we'll be working to resolve by 117, and we also have one from I believe this one's from Martin Duke, about filtering use cases based on quick properties is the title. The idea is basically for each use case that we're talking about, what value does doing that use case over quick add? We said just because you can use mock doesn't mean you should use mock or that you need to use mock. So basically trying to identify what the what the incentives for deployment are. I could say that. Bernard, do I detect you in the queue?
Yeah, no, I think this is a very important point, Spencer. But in particular, it's not just a question of over quick, because HTTP3 also runs over quick. I think you have to say, why is it better than HTTP3 over quick? Because quick is in HTTP3 if you're just transmitting streams in a single dependency like CMAF. Why is this better than low latency HLS? I think you do have to answer that.
And I think having that written down in some, Bernard, I agree with you, as I almost always do, and I think that when this issue was created, that over quick, or based on quick properties, was kind of shorthand for why would you use mock. And you're saying that the reasons that you would use mock may be related to quick properties or to other parts of the mock solution. And I take that as a very friendly amendment. Thank you. Lucas, what you got?
Hey, Spencer. Yeah, I just want to pick up on this last point. Not just for mock, but like anything. Just because you can use quick doesn't mean you should. You see like a whole load of drafts of like X over quick and whatever, and it's not always clear what the benefits are. For some people, they don't care. Like they doesn't matter. They just want to try something out, or there's benefits that aren't specifically from the protocol itself, but in the kind of the deployment and operations of something. So quick has features like connection IDs, which help load balancing, or things we've tried to capture in the applicability or manageability drafts. So for the specific issue in the question, I probably can't help in any way, but definitely this is something kind of I'm trying to raise awareness for in the general quick using community, that we want people to use quick where it makes sense, and maybe there's ways we can help them identify where it's good or bad for them and still let them make their own decision. But if there's anything missing from the current drafts we have, maybe at some point in the future, we needed to define the thing before we see how people use it and what patterns emerge. So maybe we should just grab a coffee when I see you in person. We can chat a bit more about that. But yeah, got my support.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. And so I think the other thing that's worth me mentioning is that I'm also contributing to the RTP over quick draft in AVT Core, and that is also a request that we've had on that draft. Is basically, RTP over quick is awesome, but why is it awesome? What advantages are you getting, and if you're giving up anything, or if you're exposing yourself to any problems, what problems are they? So I think that this is a really important point for both this draft and the RTP over quick draft in AVT Core. I don't know how many people in this working group have noticed, but the RTP over quick work has now been renamed as ROQ, so ROC. So we're continuing the over quick naming, shorthand naming in AVT Core as well. Anything else? I see Christian talking about a specific use case about peer-to-peer, including peers acting as relays for other peers. And I think that that is a really good thing for me to cut and paste into the repo as an issue right now, and so that I don't forget it. Thank you. Christian, did you want to say more about that? Christian, you may be muted. I'm seeing 0 kilobits output.
It's something like a permission that I gave to the management, something like once, and it's weird. I fixed that. Yeah, I mean, my concern is that the working group is very focused on relay scenarios. I mean, it's clearly one of the novelties, one of the big features we want to have, be able to use a CDN to distribute large conferences.
Yeah.
But we lose the peer-to-peer operation, we're losing something. And we want to make sure that that scenario is supported. If only because there are some people who are not really interested in having intermediaries in their communication.
Exactly, yes. And I'm just typing that. I'm just typing that as an issue so that it is now part of my memory. Bernard, is that you?
Yeah, to follow up on what Christian just said, within the discussion of ROC, of course, in our last meeting, Spencer, we had a discussion of peer-to-peer quick transport, particularly quick, tightly coupled to ICE, and that, and the idea of creating a document for that, for describing how that works. That is important, I think, because there are scenarios, in addition to what Christian mentioned, where you have peer-to-peer caching. So we see that today in streaming, where you could have an HLS stream coming into a company and then have a peer-to-peer quick or caching going on within the company. So anyway, it's something to figure out whether this is part of MOQ or just something completely separate. But there are use cases for it. It is used today very widely in streaming. So it is a real thing, typically with a WebRTC data channel, but obviously Quick is better than SCTP for that purpose.
Yeah, and so the thing I would say about that is in the repo that we're using in AVT Core for this, we have a label that we're using that says basically this is an issue, but it's an issue that is bigger than RTP over Quick. That it applies to other things running over Quick as well. And so I think what you're talking about there, especially if that becomes a generic, here's how to do Quick over ICE document, would be maybe a good example of that. But we could talk about that more on the mailing list that we have.
Yes, and I think there should be an initiative of doing something like Quick over ICE or whatever it is that we use instead of ICE. And but once we have Quick over ICE, or even if we have just basically think of people running Quick because they are on the same local network, like the LAN party scenario, then we should make sure that MOQ works in that case. If you do have, ICE gives you connectivity, but if you do have connectivity, we still have to make sure that there is no something that makes hypotheses that block peer-to-peer.
Yeah. We have had conversations in the past. When I say we, I mean me and people standing around. But we have had conversations in the past about also how connection migration works, and to a lesser extent, how multipath quick plays into all of this as well. And one of the conversations we've had about using ICE is that if you are using ICE, you might be hiding details of the addresses and port numbers and stuff like that from the applications, so that the applications are much less affected when if you have to choose a new path with ICE because there's some problem. So I think there's a lot of good work there that that MOQ and ROC and whatever else is running over quick this week could benefit from. But like I say, it's just for us to make sure that we don't forget, forget that issue that we need to work on, regardless of where we work on it. Does that? I should ask the chairs. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure that the chairs are the right people to answer that.
And we could, and again, we could talk about this on the mailing list. So, so that's fine. But if people wanted to tell me that this is a stupid idea, this is a great time to do that because it's being recorded. But thank you all. And I did have some closing thoughts. Just the reminder, the MOQ, as Christian was saying about adopting the MOQ transport draft. So the working group now owns the requirements draft, and the draft needs to reflect what the working group actually thinks. We have been taking issues and comments seriously on the individual draft, and we will commit to take issues and comments seriously on the working group draft. But please, especially as this moves into the working group repository, working group organization repository, please feel free to submit and comment on issues and submit and comment on PRs. We do have work to do, and one of the goals that I have is to try to make MOQ systems easier to implement and deploy based on what's in the use cases and requirements draft. So that's Spencer's goal. That's not the only goal, but that's what I'm shooting for. Any other questions on anything that I've talked about? If not, I thank you all, and I observe that I've never come out of one of these meetings without having learned something about the way people expect to use this protocol. Thank you all.
Thank you, Spencer. And Alan, would you like to leap in now?
Sure, and I'll even turn on my camera so you don't have to just hear my disembodied voice. So I wanted to ask questions about what people are interested in doing for the next IETF, particularly if, given that we have a transport draft that folks are generally supportive of adopting and will likely, I think, probably be adopted before then. Is anyone interested in getting hackathon space and trying to do anything? And should we try to organize that? I have ideas, but if maybe anybody else wants to jump in and say whether that's something they want to participate in or not. Bernard.
Yeah, I think it would be useful. If it would help, I'm willing to, provide tutorials on web codecs or web transport or coding or anything like that. We even have now sample code that people could play around with. I know Jordy has put out some. We have other sample codes. So I think there's some resources that people could use.
Okay, that's cool. One thing I was thinking is that I think several folks maybe pointed out is that the transport protocol does not actually need to transport media. We could come up with an interop type draft that transports something simpler than video. If people want to make sure that the transport and pub sub pieces are working as expected, independently from being able to actually send media bits. But anyway, Luke.
Yeah, just wanted to say that I've been working on some open source implementations too that would be starting points for people if they want to at the hackathon.
Okay, thanks. Christian?
I mean, I think it's a good idea, and I agree with you that we should have some argument on a very minimal things that we transport. I mean, like maybe mimic the movement of a mouse or something like that, so that we can have something that was real time and can be displayed. But and yeah, it's tight. I mean, my rough estimate is that it's about 4 weeks of work to be ready. So we hardly have 4 weeks until the IETF. So it's an interesting challenge.
Okay, yeah, I agree. It is tight, and it's also okay to show up, and if people just hack together in the same space and we don't get there, that may also be valuable use of time, even if you don't have time 4 weeks to prepare. So, cool. Lucas?
Yeah, in like the vein of just turning up and hacking, I wonder how much of given the key dependent technologies that we're talking about, like how much overlap is there with things like web transport and other stuff? And actually, if we can get something so advanced that it's like, oh, I don't know, some interop protocol for MOQ, great. But if not, maybe we just make a table of like web transport and MOQ enthusiasts, and people kind of self-arrange. Like I'm way more into the transport bits than the media part, and I could learn some stuff by seeing some demos from people while I'm hacking on stuff like that. But I might need to then step away and go on to another table that's looking at other things related to quick. And we shouldn't try and make a quick mega super table. I think that's unmanageable. But there are some overlaps, like key technology things here, and you could effectively divide that table up into little sub projects. And to me, that would seem to work. The sub projects, particularly for remote folks who can't be there in person, that need to kind of focus on whatever they're doing. And I don't know what the population constituency is for MOQ of people who will be there in person versus remote and stuff. So maybe you got a better handle on that. But it feels definitely we should try and do something. There's no like we're going to be assessed at the end of if we achieved our goals or not. Really, it's just fun.
Yeah, and as somebody who also has web transport work to do, I always appreciate time to work on my web transport implementation. So having either share a table or adjacent tables, and I can talk to the web trans chairs, one of whom is in this room, about that. Spencer.
And thank you for that. And it's always good to notice who's in the room that you can grab quickly. So I applaud the planning for a hackathon, whatever that means, and because I think this group does really well with the opportunity when they have the opportunity to spend time talking to each other for an extended period of time. So no matter what you all do at the hackathon, sounds like a good use of time to me. The one thing that I was going to ask is we mentioned the use of an architecture and the use of terminology to describe the architecture that are starting to get into actual drafts that people are submitting and requesting publication on. Do people think that that's a thing that we could talk about at our meeting in San Francisco? Basically, we could come up with a presentation of what people seem to be using as a middle image of the architecture, and what people seem to be using as the terminology to describe that middle image. Is that doable, do people think?
So you're correct that was also part of the topic we wanted to cover in this section in the agenda. One was hackathon, the other one was what should we talk about in the meeting time. So
yeah,
let me just quickly, if no one else wanted to talk about hackathon, let me summarize that. I heard lots of people say they're interested in participating. So we will make sure that we set up a table. We'll coordinate with Web Transport. I would say if somebody is interested in trying to make a streaming format draft of something simpler than video to try to interop on, maybe just ping me, because I can also try to bang one out. This is something that people want to hack on. Or if anyone has any other ideas, please bring them to the list. Now, moving on to what Spencer wanted to talk about, which is what we're going to do in San Francisco meeting-wise. So we requested 2 90-minute sessions. I don't think they have announced the scheduling thereof. We will get to argue about different things than we have been arguing about so far, because there seems to be some coordination around transport. Now, I imagine by that time there'll be plenty of issues we would like to start digging into that have been identified or will be identified against the transport. Sounds like we will want some agenda time to talk about streaming formats, possibly. And then you mentioned architecture, Spencer, and I think I heard Suhas earlier say that there was planning a revision of the architecture draft. So I think, at least right now, it doesn't seem unreasonable to add some time to talk about what we think we're going to do to meet our architecture requirements, and getting on the same page terminology is also heard mentioned was a little bit of a to-do. So that seems pretty reasonable to me. I'm not sure if anybody else has thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've spoken with Suhas about, and Cullen, I think, I'm not sure who else, about wanting to help contribute to the architecture work, moving that forward, and so they are not alone.
Okay, I see Luke in queue.
Yeah, I wanted to say as well, like, I know we're charted for an architecture, but I really want to plus one what Christian said, like this should work hop to hop. You shouldn't need to spin up a big architecture. So I think there's a lot of overlap between a non-normative architecture and requirements document, and they could be combined.
Okay. Spencer, you want to respond to that? Or say something else?
Speaking only for myself on that, I think that Luke is very wise on that statement, and that would be something that I could live with as one of the authors or editors or whatever it is we're doing with working group documents now. But thank you for that suggestion, Luke.
Okay, so I mean, other than that, if folks have other things they want to bring or request agenda time before San Francisco, please, send notes to the chairs. We'll be making the agenda obviously sometime before then. But those are kind of that's the rough shape of things we think we'll be talking about. And somebody thinks we should be talking about something else, let us know. I'm not sure I had anything else. But Spencer does.
Well, I just wanted to thank the chairs and the working group for a really productive meeting, interim meeting today. It seems like to me that we're getting better every time we meet, and so and it seems to me that the virtual interim meetings really have helped also. But thank you all for the work you're doing, and thank you to the chairs for the way you are leading the pack of squirrels.
You're like, I don't know if you're saying you're welcome. I really appreciate that, Spencer. I would like to relay the thank you onto the team of authors that put in a lot of work between Yokohama to get to here. It may not have been visible unless you were carefully following the MOQ-T repo, but there was a lot of work, I know a lot of discussions happened, a lot of time investment, and I think I just want to acknowledge folks this is a volunteer job, and people are putting a lot of time in, and we appreciate that. Ted, anything you want to add, or should we send everybody home with 25 extra minutes?
I am always in favor of sending people home if we're done, and I think we're done. So let me add my thanks to everybody for putting in the work today, and to those who've been putting it in consistently, both sets of author teams, for getting us to here. We'll take up the action items and see you on the list.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
If I could just also mention, please take a look at the meeting minutes and see if we were able to capture what people said. I was doing my best, and all I can say is I was doing a better job here than I was at ABT Corps 2 weeks ago. Make good choices.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Spencer. We'll definitely make sure we review the minutes. Thank you. All right. Have a good day, everyone.